Tonight I want to consider in some detail the issue of mental focusing, because it is the basic issue, the fundamental of psychoepistemology. What does it mean to focus? What is the difference between the mental act of focusing and the act of problem solving, of working on the solution of a specific issue or problem? To focus means simply to be aware, to be conscious, to perceive, as opposed to a state of daze, of mental fog. Focusing is the necessary precondition of problem solving, or of any purposeful mental act. Before one can do the mental work necessary to solve a given problem, one must focus on the problem. One must be mentally alert. One must be aware that there is a problem to be solved, and what is its nature. To walk across a room without bumping into the furniture requires that one be aware of the objects in one's path and the direction in which one must move in order to avoid them. To understand an idea, such as the one I'm expressing now, requires that you train your mind on what's being said and on its meaning. To analyze an emotion requires that you focus your mind on the task of identifying that emotion. To remember requires that you focus on a past event by introspection. The act of focusing is the primary mental act from which all other purposeful mental acts proceed. Man does not focus automatically. Just as the complex act of problem solving is not a reflex, so the act of focusing is not a reflex. It requires a volitional act. It requires the turning on of the spotlight of consciousness. Reality won't do it for you or to you. One will often hear people complain of the difficulties of concentration. There can be other psychoepistemological causes of this, some of which we'll discuss at a later date. But one of the causes is the implicit demand of many people that, in effect, reality must force them to focus, that reality, not their volitional act, must cause their mind to turn itself on. Countless numbers of people spend much of their time on the premise that it's the duty of reality to, in effect, turn them on. They wander around in a mental fog, only vaguely aware of what's happening around them, what ideas they are hearing, even perhaps accepting, what actions they are taking, or why. Ask yourselves if you are always equally aware of the reality around you, if you function and perceive with the same degree of clarity in all situations, or if there are times when you feel a kind of heightened awareness, and other times when you move in what feels like a relative mental daze. Are there times when you face some aspect of reality in what is essentially a semi-conscious state, in a state almost like that of drunkenness, as if seeing through a veil, with the outlines of ideas and of physical objects blurred? One can induce this state of semi-drunkenness through liquor or when cold sober. At this precise moment, my impression is that most of you are fully focused. But I've been speaking for a moment or two. Was this the case consistently during those last few moments? Or have you, for brief periods, been merely hearing words which you only more or less grasp? Do you ever listen to a conversation or lecture, or read a book, as if you were being exposed to a kind of unintelligible poetry, somehow to be emotionally but not conceptually grasped, not attempting to connect any exact meanings. When you act, are you always fully aware of what you're doing, of what is your purpose, and toward what goal you're moving? As I stated in the lecture I gave in the Basic Principles of Objectivism course, the alternatives facing a consciousness are not just between a state of full, luminous, sharp mental awareness and a fog-like state of complete daze. There are many degrees or levels of mental clarity, of focus, in between these two states. I want to analyze some of these alternatives in considerable detail so that you can check them on your own consciousness and mental habits. The examples I'll give you are by no means exhaustive, and they rarely exist in a pure form. A man not in full focus may constantly switch back and forth from one level to another, or may be in a state which is a mixture of various levels. Consider that you are watching a television show, say a crime story. You're watching it as an escape from some work you don't want to do, or to forget a bad mood, or to take your mind off your troubles. The television set is there, and you are there, so you turn it on without any real purpose. Have you ever known in such circumstances this sort of phenomenon? You grasp very little of what is occurring on the screen. Actors are moving back and forth and speaking lines. A story is developing, characterizations are taking shape. But although you see and hear, you barely grasp what's happening or what you are seeing. You watch in a kind of passive daze, so that when the show is over, you find it very difficult, perhaps impossible, to give any intelligent synopsis of what you saw, or even to say what the show was about. Not because your mind was elsewhere, but because it was nowhere at all. It was unfocused, unaware, and you watched mindlessly in a virtual psychoepistemological coma. This is perhaps the lowest level of consciousness possible to man. One is not asleep, but one has permitted oneself to face reality with one's mind turned off. One sees and hears, but does not perform the act of identification which turns one's perceptions into conceptual awareness. At best, one might retain a few disconnected pictures or images. But it's as though one perceives only subliminally. Whatever one perceives or retains is below the level of conscious awareness. Now, certainly such a state is unfortunate when one is sitting before a television set. But it is infinitely more disastrous when one is making decisions, accepting or rejecting ideas, acting and moving, having turned off the faculty that makes deciding, acting, and moving rationally possible. I have no doubt that all of you have seen people who function to a considerable extent in this kind of daze. People whom one talks to, observing that their eyes are blank and glazed, and whom one wants to shake and say, "Come to," knowing that what one is saying is not being grasped and won't be retained, but knowing also that to say "come to" won't help at all. Obviously, none of you are in this state now, or predominantly at any time. But ask yourselves only this: are you certain that you are never in this state?